If this trigger point or this problem that you're having or this emotional difficulty that you're having, if you could actually take it out of your body and your head and look at it, what are you looking at?
You are listening to A Transformed Life with Tiffani Cappello, a podcast for those who are tired of living defeated lives and are ready to rise up, conquer their fears, and create a positive future. A Transformed Life is about total life mastery, transforming your mind, health, and relationships. It's time to empower your mindset, optimize your health, and rock your relationships. Now, here is your host, transformational coach, Tiffani Cappello.
I'm so pleased to have Hunter on the show. Hunter is a certified emotional resolution practitioner, clinical hypnotherapist, rapid transformational therapist and practitioner, and a trainer. And she is a stages of love practitioner, a somatica, sex, intimacy, and relationship practitioner. She's currently training to be certified in working with couples using RLT or relational life therapy. So you can see this is a very talented woman. She operates a successful private mentoring practice in California, and she works with people, individuals, and couples of all ages. She works with both a national and international client base, and her primary focus addresses the vast and complex issues surrounding intimacy, relationships, and confidence. Hunter is uniquely passionate about her work, and her energy is infectious. She just loves people, and she's an advocate for her clients, developing their ability to generate and experience love. She is completely committed to helping people have good relationships that light them up, leave them feeling special, connected, and richly satisfied. She's especially successful in helping couples to resolve emotional conflicts and behavioral patterns that hinder connection, self-expression, and happiness. So prior to her current practice of 10 years, Hunter operated a private practice for 16 years where her singular focus was developing the aliveness and self-expression of very young children. She continues to work with children using her unique methodology, personal attributes to support them in discovering new levels of confidence and self-esteem. In essence, Hunter helps children feel great about themselves. Hunter's been married for 41 years to her best friend of 52 years and the absolute love of her life, Neil. She has 3 adult children and 2 grandchildren. And she also rigorously continues her lifelong dedication to health, fitness, personal and emotional well-being. And I know Hunter very well. We've worked together as trainers in rapid transformational therapy, and it's been an absolute pleasure to know her. I can tell you, when you meet Hunter, if you ever get to meet her, her energy is just absolutely enthralling. She just lights up a room when she walks in, and you could just feel both her passion for what she does and her love of people. So Hunter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So lovely to be here, Tiffani. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little about yourself and what you do in your practice. I know you work primarily with couples and children right now, and that's so important. If anything is needed in our society today, it's helping couples have satisfying relationships and helping children to have that confidence, because that confidence determines the entire trajectory of their lives, doesn't it?
You know, I see my work primarily as helping people unravel themselves, helping them get unstuck. I feel like problems occur like a ball of yarn, and my job is to help unravel that yarn so they can get back to who they are. And that happens a lot in couples too. There'll be multiple problems all enmeshed in one. So I see my job as helping people, first of all, distinguish what the actual problem is and then unraveling that.
And don't you think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that couples face when they're dealing with the relationship issues, is actually understanding the nature of the problem? So many couples, they know something's wrong. They can't get along. They're constantly triggering one another, but they're just not able to figure out exactly what is going on. They just feel completely overwhelmed.
I think isolating, well, and also, okay, I got to say, address this, that the problem that they think it is often not the problem. So there's the perceived problem, and then there's the actual problem. So then you've got to navigate. I have to navigate the perceived problem first, and then usually there's another problem underneath that.
So give us an example just from a couple you worked with about how this couple, came to you thinking that the problem was totally different than what you actually figured out the problem was.
Something that comes to mind is that often in couples, the other person thinks the other person in the couple is the problem. So then my job is for them to look at what about your part in this? This is not just about the other person. And this occurs often around sexuality, that the problem is perceived over there. And sometimes for some couples, when they're so their point of view is it's the other person that is the problem, that can be quite challenging to actually redirect the attention on where the actual problem is.
Well, and true that if you think the problem is the other person, that's very disempowering because you're not really able to change someone else. The only person you could actually change is yourself. And so realizing how you are creating problems in your relationship and contributing to problems in your relationship has to be very empowering for your clients. I mean, ultimately, maybe that's a shock to realize they're a part of the problem, but know and understand that they actually have power to affect their relationship just by changing the way they relate. And I've often heard it said over and over that in relationships that men usually want more sex, and they're always feeling frustrated about the lack of sex in their relationship. But one thing that's so often discussed, or not discussed, I should say, is the fact that often the way they're relating to their partner has a lot to do with that partner not desiring intimacy. Have you found that to be correct?
Definitely, that can be a point of contention. Absolutely. And look, I think that boils down to, Tiffani, that boils down to what does sex provide for you? And for them both having a look at what it provides for them, and then understanding what it provides for the other person in the partnership. And when you said empowering, I think it's more a matter when you're looking at a problem. I'm actually looking for where's the responsibility. Not necessarily the empowerment, but what can you be responsible for? And also, what are you not willing to tolerate? What are the deal breakers in your relationship? But coming back to your question about sex, first of all, what does it provide? And what even is sex? Because in our culture, we often think that sex is penetration. And sex is far more than penetration. Well, if your menu is limited, maybe it is just penetration, but I help couples to see that it goes far beyond penetration. There's so much more available in your sexual self-expression when the menu is varied, and when the sexual menu is not just focus on A, penetration, and B, orgasm.
And don't you think that a good sex life actually begins long before the actual sexual act for a couple? I think especially for women, you want that connection in other areas of your relationship, and then you want that connection to extend into that sexual part of the relationship. And if there's no connection outside of the bedroom, then it's difficult to expect that there will be connection inside the bedroom. Or if there's a lot of animosity and contempt in the relationship outside the bedroom, then it's hard to let that go when you enter the bedroom.
Right, exactly. And I don't want to assume anything stereotypically about that's for women or that's for men, but you can see patterns, but I wouldn't want anyone listening to feel excluded in any way in that when they don't fit into that structure of relationship. But whether it's heterosexual, homosexual, gay, lesbian, whatever, often there will be a disproportionate. One person is into sex more than the other, and then it's a matter of negotiation and understanding, and then also looking at what's in the way of sex being on the table for you. And that's when trauma can come into play. And, there's a whole other issues that then can affect one's sexual self-expression.
And I've heard it said that most of the time when there's conflict in a relationship, a lot of that has to do with one or both partners being triggered in the relationship by something the partner says or does. But that trigger is not just related to the actual point of contention. It's also related to something that happened in either or maybe both partners' past.
Yeah, I think that's a great point there. The way I like to look at it, and the way when I talk to couples about this or people I'm working with on a solo basis, is when let's just say we'll pick the bedroom as a place of somebody's having sex, making love. It's not just you and your partner in there. It's your upbringing, it's your religious beliefs, it's your good sexual experiences, it's your negative sexual experiences, it's what your culture perceives as how you should be in your sexual self-expression. It's past lovers, it's expectations that were fulfilled, it's expectations that weren't fulfilled. So there is a lot happening. So it's great to become aware of just who is in the bedroom with you.
I never quite thought of it that way.
Yeah. And then it's a process of like, well, who can you kick out of the bedroom? Who does not belong in here? Mostly everyone that I said on that list. But people don't think of it like that. It's like you're taking so much in with you. And then there's the whole notion of unfulfilled expectations, which is a huge one for people, and first sexual experiences that were not great. And the impact of that. And you were talking about triggering. So all of those are definite trigger points. And I think because those experiences are in the background, people are not really attuned to the impact of all of those things that I mentioned: family, culture, religion, education, lack of education, education from porn rather than actually what sex is really like for real people. There's triggers all around. You can see it's a minefield in the bedroom.
So if a couple recognizes, if they're listening to what you just said and they say, oh my gosh, I can see that. I can see that is happening. I do have all these other influences and traumas and people in my bedroom that don't belong, and it's impacting my sexual experience. How do you go about kicking those people out or teaching the clients to do that in their own relationship?
That's a great question. Because I'm trained in lots of different modalities, I'll pick what I think will work best. Sometimes it's looking into the past, as we do in rapid transformational therapy and RTT, and looking at those fundamental experiences that have really shaped or they've created certain beliefs or conclusions about sex or yourself as a sexual being. So I might go down that path of just looking at those, what I would call pinnacle moments in somebody's life where they've been profoundly affected by what somebody said or didn't say, did or didn't do, and then looking at what they made it mean. So I would access that from an RTT perspective, and I would ask if I can see that it's really influencing, I'll then schedule a solo session so I can work on that alone with one of the parties. But if I was doing if I was doing emotional resolution, which I find really helpful around sexuality, it's really helpful around everything, but I would actually have that session in front of the other person so they can then see and understand what goes on for them emotionally, and more succinctly is what emotions have not been resolved in the body, they're stored in the body, that if we work on them, we can release them so then now they're free to express themselves. It's really great for a partner to watch that. Of course, I would get the partner's permission to do that. And for the most, some people know I want to do that by myself because they feel more inhibited. But if I can create a context for a couple and see the worth of that, then that's really valuable. And with emotional resolution, I can teach them how to actually work on those things that trip them up by helping them understand an understanding of their sensorial body, like the sensations in their body that tell them they're in a triggered state.
Oh, okay. All right. So that makes a lot of sense. And I'm thinking that when you allow the other partner to observe the emotions this individual is going through and help them understand how they're being triggered, it probably sheds a whole new light on their relationship, because previously they may have seen their partner's actions and taken them personally as something that is indicative of maybe a partner's lack of love for them or lack of respect. And when they could understand that it's coming from wounds of the past, that is engendering a lot of compassion for the other partner.
Absolutely. And the thing about emotional resolution, Tiffani, it actually doesn't work with the past at all. It's not, I would say it's not interest. Focus is not the past. It's what's happening in present time in a very small slice of life. So it would look like I would ask the person who's having the difficulty, when did this happen? Take me there, tell me in present tense. And in the telling of when that's happening, those emotions that were activated when the disconnect happened come up right there and then. And then we work on them. Then the story about it is not important. That's why it's great for a client to be there, because it's not like they have to listen to this list of grievances about them. They're actually witnessing what happens in someone's body when they're triggered and how we can dismantle it. It's really cool.
And I'm guessing that physiological response coming from that is often manifesting itself in sexual inhibitions. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
So once you bring out these emotions, how do you help the client then to move to complete resolution so there's, that intimacy can be worked through in their relationship?
Okay, there's a number of, so taking emotional resolution, if I'm looking at that as a technique to use, then that will actually be resolved within that session. So, and I'll know when it's complete, like when those sensations now have come to homeostasis, when you can tell me that story and you're not triggered. You've got some distance from it. So it's very matter of fact. And then okay, the charge is gone. There's also another component of when you can take that technique, say this would be great for no, I don't know whether this is too much detail about this, but I'll just say it briefly. There's another way that you can do this that goes right into the imagination. If this trigger point or this problem that you're having or this emotional difficulty that you're having, if you could actually take it out of your body and your head and look at it, what are you looking at? Now I'm going to work with the metaphor that represents what they're going through. And then people have real power to do that, because now if it's a thing, then I can interact with it as a thing and dismantle it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think it helps clients to be able to view it as something that is not necessarily their identity. Because we see our problems, whether they're in our own personal life or their relationships, we begin to adopt them as if they are who we are. They are our identity. And when you can separate that out and realize that my problems in my relationship don't mean that I have a certain identity, and that identity makes me unlovable, unworthy, unable to enjoy sex, whatever it is, that's separate from me. And then you're able to heal that on a different level. Now, you and I both understand that at the root of so many of our thought processes and behaviors lie deep subconscious beliefs. Those subconscious beliefs can be put into our minds from past events, from our culture, from media influences, from religious influences. There's just so many inroads. And so I'm wondering now, if you have a couple in your office and they're struggling with communication, and one of those people has a deep feeling, a deep belief that they're unlovable. How are you shifting that belief? Because perhaps even the partner in the relationship, the dynamics of their relationship, the conflict is causing so much problems that it just sort of validates the initial belief that this individual has, that I'm unlovable. And then when you feel unlovable, doesn't that sort of reflect in the behaviors you have towards your partner?
It's not a thing that is often like couple don't sit in front of me and go, you know what? I feel like I'm unlovable. It doesn't come up like that. It might come up in conversation, but it's not really something that people are necessarily aware of, that they'll go, yeah, that's what the problem is. I think I'm unlovable. I don't think people's awareness is there about that. I think it's operating so deeply sometimes that they're unaware of it.
I think that's the beauty of using techniques and tools in your practice that are accessing those subconscious beliefs so that we're able to heal them on that level.
Yes.
So how can couples deal with triggering one another? Let's say through the course of couples therapy, a couple is realizing, an individual in that relationship is realizing that what I'm doing is consistently triggering my partner. Is it all about healing those triggers, or are there times when the other partner is also responsible for altering their behavior to try to keep from triggering the other person? I mean, who has that responsibility there?
I think what you said there is both, and they're both valid. What is it that I say or do that really upsets my partner? I feel it like it's almost like what plugs them in, like like you're plugged into a socket and then suddenly bam, you've just gone somewhere. Yeah, having an understanding of what it is that I'm doing that evokes something that's really interesting around that, and is that often I've noticed that women are very, very sensitive to tone of voice. And what, if we're talking about a heterosexual relationship, if a man raises his tone or talks passionately, a woman will hear that very differently, like I've done something wrong, or they hear tone really differently. And it's really great to educate a couple or bring their awareness to it, and it could be the other way around. The woman might have a tone that's really demeaning or condescending. She doesn't even know that she's speaking in that way, and then having her partner talk about that. Like, that tone of voice is a fascinating one, and that's something that the person who's using that tone, if they're bringing an awareness to that, they can modify their behavior that they didn't even know impacted their partner.
And I think that's so much of what goes on in relationships and why couples are having trouble is because they don't actually know what they're doing that's causing problems within the relationship. And that's why it's so important to have someone from the outside whose objective is looking in and who's not emotionally involved and is not being triggered, to be able to help you navigate through these difficulties and see what your responsibility is, what your contribution is. And so I'm wondering, what tips you offer couples to foster more respectful, loving communication? Because it seems to be a huge problem. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the more busy our lives get in modern society, and couples get busier, and we're constantly distracted by just the fast pace of life. And we're constantly learning to communicate more through electronic devices. And it's impacting our face-to-face communication, and couples are having less time for that. And when they are home and they have an opportunity for that face-to-face communication, they're often still interacting with electronic devices. They may be watching TV together, which isn't really communicating. Or they may be looking at their phones while they're sitting at the table having a discussion or having dinner.
Right.
So how can they foster a deeper level of communication? Because I've noticed some couples don't seem to really even know those first steps because they've been outside of the realm of healthy communication, or maybe they didn't see it modeled in their home. So they don't even know how to go about those first steps.
So, Tiffani, if you could just help me here, what was the question?
What can couples do to foster loving communication between one another?
It's a great question. I think, from my point of view, it's one of the most important things is manners. To treat your partner with respect, please, thank you, courtesy. It goes a long, long way. And often when people have been in a relationship for a while, they're not very well mannered with each other. And it's jarring, and there's a disrespect to it too. It's not taking care of how what you're saying is being heard and being affected by my partner. And along those lines, I think the most important thing for couples is what I would call likability. You can love anyone, but you can't like everyone. And having couples really understand that the likability, when you like someone, you're willing to go the extra mile for them. You're willing to adapt and change. And being aware consciously, I did this in my own relationship. My husband and I do this all the time, is that we make sure that we are so likable. It's my job to be likable. And this may show up really simply. Like, I used to do this thing when we'd go somewhere, like we'd have a vacation or we'd have a night in a hotel, that I would go into the room and I would find fault. Like, there was something about that room that wasn't perfect or wasn't to my standard. And it was such a buzzkill. And I thought, wow, imagine being around that. First of all, how ungrateful is that? And just how negative that is. Now, I wouldn't do it all the time, but it would just show up in these little things that I thought were wrong. And I thought, oh my God, that I am not being very likable in that moment. I need to do something about that. So now when I go into a hotel room, I make it a point of finding something that is totally awesome. That changes the whole mood of because when you walk into a hotel room, that sets the tone for your time together. That was a game changer for me. And I will often talk to couples when they're going on vacation. What version of you is going to show up on this vacation? And it makes such a difference, because now they're aware of who they're being and who can I create myself to be on this vacation? Who am I taking? Fun Susie or negative Susie? No, I'm going to take fun Susie. It's a fabulous thing to just play with. Makes a real difference.
Yeah, I'm curious to know how long in your marriage before you actually realized you were doing this.
It was probably about, I want to say, 15, 20 years ago.
Okay. So I find this interesting because you've been married how long now?
It'll be 42 years in December.
And that's quite an accomplishment. And you don't look old enough to be married that long. But I'm always amazed by but you take such good care of your health. So I know why you have retained such a youthful appearance and you're so vivacious and
take that as a compliment. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. So, but one of the things that I've noticed, is people get married and then they forget that they're supposed to grow together. So they're expecting that they have this partner, and we're always kind of on our best behavior before we get married. And then that a commitment occurs, and then people just go, oh, now I can relax. And they don't take care of themselves, either emotionally, spiritually, physically. And they just assume that that partner is going to always be there. So that means I don't have to work with the relationship anymore. And then they also think that they've now got this partner who's perfect, and they forget that you're actually on this journey together. And there's no standard of perfection. And you're supposed to be, as you're traveling this journey together as a team, growing better, stronger, wiser, learning together. And so they hold their partner up to the standard. And you just, given us example that even 20 years into a marriage, you realize that you were doing something that was actually detrimental to your relationship, and you were able to become self-aware of that and change. And so I think that a lot of couples, especially nowadays, they go into a relationship expecting perfection. And now, especially with all the online dating, there's this constant revolving door. You have the ability to go online and you can replace your current partner with a new partner in a couple weeks or months. Right. And so we have these checklists of this is what I want in a partner, and we forget that we're evolving and growing. And so they meet someone and expect that this perfect dream partner is going to be standing in front of me and they're going to be the epitome of perfection. I think that's why so many people can't maintain a relationship, is because they're not willing to grow together in a relationship. They have that standard, you're not meeting it, and they're angry about that. And so I really appreciated that story, because you were just illustrating that even 20 years down the road, there's still learning and growing occurring in a healthy relationship, and you're becoming better partners. Like, I'm going to take a guess that you are a better partner to your husband than you were when you got married. And if you probably look back on those first years of your marriage, you might go, oh my goodness, the things I said or did. And so I think it's appropriate for couples to go into a relationship with the right kind of expectations, that we are learning about each other. We are immature. We are new at this. But when you have that loving communication, that respect, and you're working towards that likability, that's going to be a real game changer to the lasting nature of that relationship. Now, there are some couples I know that you probably meet in your counseling. You just know they're not going to make it. Or maybe they shouldn't make it. Maybe there's something in that relationship where, this is such an unhealthy dynamic. This relationship really needs to end. If someone's listening to this podcast and they're wondering, does my relationship need to end or should I continue? What are the signs that you see when you're working with a couple that this toxic dynamic is really not good? This relationship needs to be over.
First up, before I answer that question, I want to add something to what you were saying, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
About learning and growing together. I love what my darling husband says about me when he's talking about me to somebody else. He says, I never want to know who Hunter is. because if I knew who she was, she would have stopped growing. I want her to change and evolve and expand. And I just love that. He's such a champion for that. And we are for each other, that we want each other to grow and be unrecognizable to what we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So there's always been that. Now, I was 23 when I was married. So my wisdom now as a 64-year-old woman, way different to when I was 23. Now, I've been blessed with a relationship that's very easy, that we just get along so well, and we're very easygoing. So I haven't had to deal with a lot of contention, and we both don't really like conflict. So anyway, sorry, putting that aside. So when I see, was it about that I don't think it's going to work?
Yeah. So what are the signs that you see in a couple that this relationship is just not going to work? I know Dr. John Gottman. Have you heard of Dr. John Gottman? And he says that there is a one sign in a relationship that predicts, for him at least, that this relationship is probably 95% likely to fail, and that was contempt in a relationship, where the couple just shows that one or the other part is showing a great deal of contempt. I just wonder if you would agree with that analysis, and if you're seeing the same thing, and if there's anything you would add to that.
Yeah, really hard to rise above contempt. Very hard to rise above that. The thing that I think really affects a couple ultimately is they're not aligned. They're not aligned in what they want. They're not aligned in their beliefs. They're not aligned in what they see the possibility of their life together and separate is. So when there's not an alignment, when the alignment is out, very hard to have a successful relationship. So being aware of where you're not aligned and then working on how can we create alignment in whatever area where it's out.
And now, just circling back to that idea of contempt within a relationship, what would you say are the signs of contempt? What kind of behavior, speech patterns are people exhibiting, displaying contempt to their partner? If we have someone listening who's just thinking, okay, contempt, I'm not sure I understand what that is and what that looks like.
I think first of all, what do you mean by contempt? So I can answer to that.
Yeah, to me, contempt is just a disrespect and a dislike, like you mentioned, likability earlier. It's a dislike of your partner. I just don't even like this person that I'm with. So therefore, they're speaking, and I'm rolling my eyes. I'm mocking my partner. I'm name calling. I'm exhibiting disdain in one or more ways, either through my speech, my behavior, and that the speech can even be nonverbal, just nonverbal cues we're giving the partner to show that I just don't even like you. I have a disdain for you. It seems like when it gets to that point, like Dr. Gottman says, the couples very rarely ever come back from that because the relationship at that point is so toxic. And I would say maybe a lot of times it's reached the point of being actually abusive, if not physically, then verbally abusive.
I think that I had a thought there and I've just lost it. Look, if a couple were really aware of this is the dynamic, this is what's going on, I have contempt, I don't like him. Now, if they came and said, we want to do everything that we can to make this work, then you're bringing a whole level of commitment to what you're doing. Now, often, as you were saying, it's and as is it Dr. Gottman was speaking about, very hard. You usually one foot's out the door by then. And I always ask couples that. So is for either of you, have you got one foot out the door? And often no one's ever actually asked them that question, or they haven't been honest with themselves. And they'll contemplate, yeah, I do. Then that brings a whole level of awareness. So where are you present, where you're not? You've already got your escape route. Contempt is so, like coming back to, as you were saying, it comes back to likability. If you don't even like your partner, how on earth can you make a go of it? Well, then it's like, then it comes back to that likability. So what can I do about that? What is it about you that I don't like? And what am I willing to alter and work on so we can create some sort of connection and recreate the relationship? But a good thing to know is when a couple comes to me, the relationship that they had is over. That relationship has died. Now we get to play here. We get to create a new relationship. And that comes down to willingness. Am I willing to do that? Am I willing to do what it takes? Or have I decided that I'm actually out? And I think, Tiffani, where couples trip up is that we have the notion. Remember, one of my teachers, Alison Armstrong, talks about this, that we think that a relationship is supposed to be forever. Some relationships are not. They have a shelf life. And finding a way to graciously and lovingly exit that relationship is often my job. You don't have to leave with hate. At one point in your life, you loved this person. So it's so hard for people. This person that I loved, I now hate, because people think they have to hate someone to exit. So they'll generate more hate, but that you don't need to do that. You can actually exit with love and respect, and that just no longer works anymore.
And that's so much better too if there's kids involved, isn't it? Because,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I know the research shows that if a couple has a volatile relationship, or in a relationship that's not working out, the stress of that in the home with the kids is often worse than for the parents to separate. And oftentimes the parents think that their kids don't understand there's a problem. They're trying to hide that problem, but kids know. They can feel the energy of that in a relationship, and they can feel the energy of that hate, and it creates an anxiety, especially if the parents are trying to pretend there's nothing wrong. Kids know there's something wrong, but it's actually not being discussed. So the couple thinks they're protecting the children by not discussing the fact that there's an issue. But what that does, I think, for kids, and I see this working with clients, is it's actually creating more anxiety within the children because they know something's wrong, but when they go to the parent, they're getting pushed away. No, everything's fine. You don't need to worry, but they're not dumb. And they know. So when you talk to your kids in an appropriate way, obviously there's an inappropriate way to discuss personal, intimate things with children, but you just let them know, in a way that they can comprehend that something's going on and we're doing our best to work out. I think it gives them actually more of a sense of security. But when couples make that decision to exit the relationship, when there's hatred, fighting, strife, one person pitting themselves against the other person, this is what's actually doing the damage in a divorce situation. And I think there's research to back that up, that it's not the actual divorce as much as it is how the parents are divorcing. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. And like you said, children know, they pick it up energetically. They might not be able to express it, but they know something's off. Absolutely. And what was the question? What was the question at the end of that? Ask that me again. Do you remember what it was?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I'll have to snip this part out.
Okay, no problem.
So we'll just snip that part out. So I think you answered. Actually, it was just, would you agree with what I just said, which is, I think that was it, unless I asked another question I don't realize. So if a couple is listening to this podcast and they're asking themselves, now, how do I know? Because I am feeling, I'm committed to my partner. So how do I know that I have what it takes in my relationship for it to really work? What are the components of a strong, healthy relationship that need to be in place? And even if the person's listening, they can say, well, I need to work on this, but I can feel really good about that. Because I think a lot of couples worry. So they hear so many stories about, Bob and Sue down the street. We thought they had a great marriage. And now I just found out that Sue's filing for divorce, and it comes as a shock to the whole community and sometimes a shock to the partner. And so how can we, in a relationship, know that our relationship is strong? What should we be looking for? What should we be working on?
What should you be cultivating, you mean?
Yes.
Respect, patience, compassion, time for each other, really listening, and something that is really, really key is appreciation.
And I've heard go ahead, I'm sorry.
Taking time every day to say one thing to each other that the other one appreciates in their partner. Appreciation goes a long, long way. And often in relationships, particularly long-term relationships, people feel unappreciated. And it's, I was going to say it's not good. And I will say it's not good. You don't want to feel you're unappreciated, unseen, unheard and looking for things that your partner does that that makes a difference. And it might be, oh my God, you are such a great father. I love the way that you spoke to our son. It made him feel so special. Thank you. Finding little things like that, they're big things, but the less obvious things of, oh, you're funny, thank you for that. Nothing wrong with that, but finding those, really looking and watching for what can I appreciate in my partner.
I think that's a really big point because a really important point, because the one thing I noticed is how important our thinking is in a relationship. Personally, that's what we got to take responsibility for. And so if my focus in my relationship, I can shift it in a day if I want to, just by deciding to focus on the things I don't like about my partner. And I think everyone in every relationship has things they don't like. So if you're honed in and focusing on what you don't like about your partner, you're going to have a bad relationship. If you're focused on what you do like and appreciate about your partner, which is what you're talking about, that relationship is going to take on a whole different dynamic. And you really have a choice each and every day on what your focus is.
Absolutely.
And you brought up the topic of listening and how important it is. And I heard, and I don't know who to give credit for this to, but I heard someone once talk about it. It might have been Dr. John Gottman, about when you are listening, people think they're listening, but they're listening to respond. They're not listening to understand. They're just listening long enough to where I can now make my point and prove my point and interject what I have to say because it's so important. And they've missed entirely what their partner was trying to convey. So asking yourself when you are listening, am I listening so that I could understand? And then if you're not understanding, asking those clarification questions to make sure you are. And even if you think you understand, just kind of verbalizing. So what I heard you say is rewording that. And the partner might say, no, actually, that's not what I was saying. And so you're making that effort to understand. And then once you truly understand, then that real communication can open up.
Yeah. And just further bringing awareness to something that you said about, well, if you're focusing on the negative, what do you think you're going to keep seeing? That's all you're distinguishing out. So that's all you can see. It just feeds it. It feeds the disdain. It feeds the contempt, because that's your focus. You can't even see your partner as a whole human being then.
And then that relationship can even shift into being abusive, either physically or verbally. Now, talk about abuse in relationships, because I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too, that some people are consistently and continually choosing abusive partners. Now, why is it that they do that? Because I've even had friends and they'll say, I am not going to choose another abuser. I will never date a man who either verbally hits me, with contempt, or physically hits me. And yet they meet a guy and they say, this guy would never hit me. He does, And so why are they making these choices over and over and over?
Great question. And I am not an expert on abuse, but it seems to me it's what they're used to. It's perhaps they were raised in an abusive home and that's what was modeled to them. That seems normal. That seems like the way that you relate. But it is very interesting that people will date the same person over and over, like the same, meaning not exactly the same person, but the same type of person. It's feeding something. I would be curious about, what is this perpetuating? What do you get out of it that is kept in place? What's kept in place? And I don't mean get out of it like, because sometimes people are in such abusive relationships, and I'm not saying that the person in it's their fault. No. But it's complex, Tiffani. That notion of staying in an abusive relationship. And often people don't feel like they've got a way out. They don't know how to get out.
And I've seen that with women, particularly who have small children.
Right.
And they're stay-at-home mom. And they feel very stuck because financially they don't, they can't see a way out. And I think there needs to be more support within communities.
Great.
Is it ever okay? I mean, my feeling is if you are being physically abused or your child is being physically or even sexually abused, you should never stay in that relationship. You need to get out. The amount of damage done to you psychologically. And I know a lot of people are coming from traumatic backgrounds and that trauma is just being perpetuated. And then now their children are experiencing that same trauma. And it's just so damaging. So when a couple comes to you and they're 100% committed to working on that relationship, do you think, and most of the time when there is that 100% commitment, are they able to work through their issues?
Once again, it's very general, but they have got much more of a chance of making it work if they're coming in with that kind of commitment level.
Yeah, so when one or both partners has a foot out the door, that really detracts from their success, right?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And then, that's okay too, in that if one person goes, I need the other foot out the door too. And that can be the end of the relationship because they no longer, I think people getting aware of their deal breakers is very, very helpful. And for their partner to know what the deal breakers are.
And some things need to always be a deal breaker. I mean, like we talked about abuse and, either verbal or physical needs to be a deal breaker every single time. Now, talk about how you help couples create connection in relationships. Like, what specifically do you recommend if a couple are to come to you and they say, our relationship isn't terrible. We have some spats, but we just want a stronger relationship. We just want to have a more thriving relationship. And we want to ensure that relationship is going to last. We want to be married 41 years like you, Hunter. That's what they say. We want the kind of relationship you and your husband has, what do you think the number one thing you could tell that couple to do?
I would suggest that they look at, well, what's in the way of that happening? Now we've got something to work on.
Mm. Mm. And, don't you think, and maybe this is just me, but the couples face more challenges now with just the complexity of our society, or do you think it's gotten easier for couples with the modern conveniences?
I think people really struggle in relationships a lot of the time. Look at the divorce rate. I think it's at about 40 to 50%, if not more, depending on what statistics you look at. And then even higher for second marriages. That's up in the 60s and 70%. So relationships for a lot of people don't come easy because it's you in the relationship. Like, it's two human beings trying to live a life together, trying to be aligned, trying to be loving. There's so much going on that I think it's always been. I think probably even in the 50s it was, but people just stuck together because they were miserable. So am I answering your question? I have a feeling I'm not.
You're doing fine.
Okay. So I think you were saying, is it harder for couples now than ever? Well, I think it's harder for people in general. And people are the couple. So if it's harder for people, if there's more stress or more uncertainty, I mean, COVID really, it really like did a number on us. And there's so much division in our culture. So now we're dealing with that outside of the home. So people have got a lot going on for them.
I've noticed too that culturally at large, whether in the United States or you're in Australia, you're in Europe, I mean, anywhere in the Western world in particular, especially I think the media, social media is driving this polarization, having people just create political tribes, ideological tribes. And I noticed, especially during the last elections and with COVID and vaxxed, unvaxxed, all these different opinions coming in all directions. And I'm going to take a guess, this really impacted marriages because I just kept hearing over and over again in the media that couples were being divided along these polarities as well in ways that they had not even considered. And now you've got couples fighting and picking opposite ends of ideologies and spectrums. And I can't imagine the challenges.
Absolutely. I think it's a great point that you're bringing up, that polarization within our culture. And I feel like we've lost the art of being able to actually discuss things. Because if somebody's point of view is not your point of view, now it's wrong. So how can you have a discussion with that? So I think, that impact of within a couple of that polarization. Oh, man. Yes.
And it's really about black and white thinking, which is one of the cognitive distortions that we learn about. I feel like, and I would love to do a show on this at some point. And I know there is, I wish I could remember the name of the book, where they talk about how the cognitive distortions that we recognize in psychology are now being pushed culturally on people. So the media is promoting this black and white thinking, right, so that people are unable to meet in the middle and they're being separated into these opposite extremes. And I'm 100% right. And everybody that doesn't agree with me is an idiot. And I saw this, I was in a religious cult for 15 years. And one of the key aspects of a religious cult is that we are right. We are the chosen. Our church is correct and right. And everyone out there is dumb and stupid and to be disdained and bad. And you can put all sorts of labels on them. And then I come out of a religious cult and I come to the world and think, oh, I'm out here in this loving universe. And I find this same sort of division and cultic mentality is mainstream.
Wow. It's really interesting.
And I see this polarization occurring. And I think there's a real huge upsurge post-COVID because I think everyone turned inward. They weren't going out. They weren't socializing. Everyone's locked into their home. Couples are now forced to be together 24 hours a day. All their problems are rising to the surface. And social media is just sort of feeding different narratives to different people, depending on, what you are looking for. And so I think people have now developed these cult-like opinions and polarization, so that it's me and my opinions, and I'm being constantly fed what validates my existing paradigm, and I'm looking out and everyone else is wrong. And this has to be affecting people's interpersonal relationships, because I've had people tell me, I used to have a good relationship with my mother and father, but I haven't talked to them since they decided to become anti-vaxxers. I'm thinking, wow, is that worth losing your relationship with your parents over? Or my husband and wife, my wife and I got along really good, but till she decided to become a Republican or a Democrat or vote for Trump or vote for Biden, and it's just, I've never seen this level before. And so now people can't seem to approach someone they disagree with and be able to listen to understand.
Right.
They're not doing that. They're listening to prove themselves right. And they come automatically with the assumption that everyone who doesn't agree with me is an idiot. And I can't understand. I see that just in the general population,
Right.
the inability to be able to hold respect, consideration for someone who comes from the opposite perspective of you, whether it's politically, whether it's ideologically, whether it's religiously. And that's got to be affecting marriages and all kinds of relationships. You develop that black and white thinking.
Absolutely. And going back to what I said before about who's in your bedroom, now that bedroom got really crowded.
Yeah. Now Donald Trump or it's in your bedroom too, or whoever. Oh, that's kind of a grotesque thought. Or any of the political leaders in my bedroom. That's a grotesque thought.
Right.
Yeah. So where couples do face some really unique challenges to our times, but I think the important thing to realize is that there are tools, techniques, processes, and ways of relating that, despite all the challenges, a couple that is committed to one another really can learn to communicate, to connect on a more genuine level, and they can learn to work through problems as long as they're willing to do that. And, they're willing to be likable a lot of times, to listen, to understand, and to create changes. So if someone wants to work with you, Hunter, if there's a couple listening and they're thinking, wow, I really need to make changes in my relationship. There is some other people in my bedroom, or I'm noticing some contempt rising in my relationship. I want to nip this in the bud. I don't want to have to get divorced or end my relationship. How can people reach out to you to work with you?
Thank you. Go to my website, talkingtohunter.com, and there's a contact page there, or a phone number, and just reach out, call me, send me an email. I love working with couples. I really love it. It's so it's so rich. Yeah. So I
it
really
must feel good to know that a couple is still together because you were able to help them resolve their issues.
Right.
And you also work with children, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. And any specific kind of children?
Often self-esteem issues for children, finding their way, listening to that, understanding their inner voice, and that it's not them. And I love working with kids. Kids are so honest.
And I always tell parents the number one gift that you can give your child is confidence, because it informs the rest of their lives.
Yeah. It's like you can't give someone confidence. Confidence is you can help a child to be confident. And what does that entail? Well, I guess a role of a parent is to is to have your child feel good about themselves, and what can they do to help their child feel good about themselves.
Yeah, excellent point. All right. Well, it's an absolute pleasure having this discussion with you today. I know I learned a lot, and it was a great discussion. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much. That was so fun.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of a Transformed Life podcast. I hope you found it informative, thought-provoking, and entertaining. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast so you never miss out on future episodes. I cover a variety of topics to help you transform your mind, health, and relationships. If you found this episode helpful or entertaining, please take a moment to leave me a rating and review on your preferred podcast platform. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me to reach more listeners who could benefit from this content. Lastly, I love hearing from my listeners, so please reach out to me on Instagram, Twitter, and even TikTok with your thoughts, feedback, or ideas for future episodes. Your input helps me to make better content and build a community around this podcast. So thank you again for tuning in, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.